Hello, good to have you. It's Tuesday lunch, brown bags and Bibles.
We should have brown bags.
We should have brown bags. We have Bibles electronically. Brown bags and Bibles is where we break down life's biggest befuddlements with biblical basics. Say that 10 times fast, or 1 time fast. I'm Scott Wakefield, lead pastor here at First Christian Greenville, and you are the inimitable beekeeper.
Yes, beekeeper. That's
Beekeeper,
who I am. Mark
yes.
Liebert.
Mark Liebert. Mark Liebert's an elder here, involved in leading marriage ministry, and has done some preaching for us. And Mark and I take advantage of the opportunity to come together at lunch on Tuesdays at noon to talk about important things like what are the proper roles of and relationships between civil government, the church, and the family. So we're talking about proper roles of what is their place, what is their role, and then the relationships between the spheres of government, the church, and the family. This is important stuff here in the COVID world that has been pressed on of late. Before we get into it too much, I want to mention that you can online or text in your questions to the number on the bottom of the screen. By the way, how cool is that? We've got the screen there, the little numbers, says Mark Liebert and Scott Wakefield on the side there. That's thanks to our comms and tech guru, Nathan Dickerson. Shout out to Nathan, wherever you are out there. Wherever you may be. Actually, he's just about 1.5 feet that far from the camera.
Hi, Nathan.
So if you hear some typing or some munching on pals, that's Nathan.
I'm smelling it.
Yes, indeed. So, Mark and I have put together a lot of great content for you today. We're glad you're with us. So let's jump right into it.
We must be selective, mustn't we?
We must be selective because we have many pages of fodder. So an overview, the first thing that we want to start with is the idea that God has ultimate authority.
Yeah.
Where do we get that in the Bible?
Places like Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Or Revelation 4, you are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being.
Yes, they're sustained in.
Yes.
His being alive and existing. Big theme in the beginning of Colossians as well. When you mentioned Psalm 24:1 there, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The fullness thereof obviously implies all of the things in it, all of the things that fill it. The next verse there in Psalm 24 says, for he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. So that he's the founder, he's the establisher, the Alpha, the Omega, creator of all that is. Right. And so that's where his authority is rooted.
Right. I mean, we understand this concept. You buy something and you want to know how to use it and you've lost the instruction manual. You call or you go online and you look up the owner, the creator, the author. How is it designed? How is it supposed to work? How does it function? We understand that concept. Author, creator, source.
Do we understand that concept? Because I'm not exactly Mr. Go to the instructions all the time.
Maybe we should.
I'm pretty sure I know how this works.
Don't get directions, right?
Yeah. I was also thinking about Exodus 19:5, where God says, these people are mine. They're my treasured possession. He's talking about the people of Israel. And he says, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. And he says, for all the earth is mine. So them being a part of him is a subset of him having authority over all. Yeah. Anything else about ultimate authority being God's? I have a couple additional thoughts if you don't.
I don't want to jump ahead, so if go ahead with what you're thinking before I do that.
Okay, so if it's all God's and he created it all, that is a statement about God being in permeating all things in terms of involvement in all things, and he is over every single aspect of life. So he permeates and is over every single aspect of life. Abraham Kuyper was a well-known thinker about these issues of state, government, family, church, those kinds of things. Abraham Kuyper was a well-known theologian, and he was a university president and very involved in civil governmental affairs. He said famously in a speech at the Free Amsterdam University, University of Amsterdam, he said, "There is not one square inch of the entire creation about which Jesus does not cry out, 'This is mine, this belongs to me.'"
Yeah, I was thinking as you were saying that, Romans 11:36, for from him and through him and to him are all things, to him be glory forever. It doesn't get much more comprehensive than from, through, and to, because it's beginning, it's sustained, and it's end.
Yeah.
It makes it pretty clear.
Yep, that's good. And to him are those things meant to be directed. The purpose and the calling from which we take our direction is God as creator who institutes all things to be about him. And so we, to all the details of life, I was thinking as I was preparing earlier about 1 Corinthians 10, that his lordship over all creation extends to what we eat. Mm-hmm. So Paul is talking in 1 Corinthians 10. This is the context of whether or not it's okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols, especially in the home, because the temple stuff was before that, but it's still meat sacrificed to idols. And he says in 1 Corinthians 10:25, eat whatever is sold in the meat market. This is Paul giving instructions to the Christians there. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. And then he roots that in Psalm 24 that you quoted earlier by saying, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof.
Yeah, another place where Paul brings this out is Colossians 1. For in him, Jesus, all things were created. And then it says, all things have been created through him and for him. Mm-hmm. He is before all things. In him all things hold together. Mm-hmm. And he is the head of the body, the church, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. Yeah. Again, beginning, sustainment, and by him, for him, everything, he is preeminent. Yeah. That's his authority. There's nothing outside of that. There just isn't anything outside of that. The breath we draw now, if we draw breath to rebel against God, we are doing so by the grace that he gives us. That's the amazing truth. Yeah. We are upset with God and we demand something from God. In reality, he is just gracious to allow us to even do so.
One thing I was thinking of also about the entire, universe really, but we're talking about the world here. The world being God's and him being sovereign over all creation. A professor at my undergrad used to say, all truth is God's truth. Yes. If it's true, it's because God made it true. Whether or not that it's acknowledged as such is not the point there. Yeah. And whether or not it's in the sphere of the spiritual stuff of church isn't the issue. All things that are true because God made it so. First thing we want to say is that God has ultimate authority. And the next thing we want to say is that God's authority is intrinsic, found within himself. Yeah,
that's an interesting point because intrinsic is obviously the opposite of extrinsic. So intrinsic means you find it within, extrinsic means it comes from without. God says in Isaiah 45:5, I am the Lord and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. So this idea of God's authority is not something he developed or brought from someone else. It's simply rooted in who his being is. There is no other like God. I am he and there is no other. Which means all other authority is derived from him.
Right. Yes. If it's true that he is that God,
right,
then all authority comes from him. That's why the Bible talks about him being almighty, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, of all claimants to authority. He is the ultimate.
Yeah. Romans 13:1 says, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God, which means, this is a quote from Sproul again, it exists only by delegation.
Yes. This is where we're starting to get into the meat of how God's authority works out in the world when it comes to church, state, family. Right. All authority is a delegated or lesser authority, ultimately.
Right. And it's... whether or not it is a just authority is rooted in whether it conforms to God.
Yes.
And whether or not it is a proper authority to obey is rooted in whether it has been delegated by God.
Whether it speaks to the intrinsic authority that is in him. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. That's good. And here's an important point, I think, along with this. The point that we're making here isn't just that all authorities are lesser authorities than God, which is something we believe as Christians and non-Christians do not. But the point that we're making here is that there's no such thing as authority that is not grounded in something, period, whether a person or an idea, right? So we have identity politics today because, frankly, the ideas are not what drive the politics as much as they should. And so the authority there is not rooted in the ideas. I think we'd all agree that something I've been saying for years is political dialogue in this country has become a farce for decades now. And so the ideas are not the preeminent thing that are driving us. It's the people. And so that's why we have identity politics in a way which means that the authority isn't rooted in the rightness or wrongness of the ideas and how they move forward. So we're not just making a point about all authorities being lesser authorities, as if that doesn't apply to everything, because it does. Secular governments root their authority in something.
Yes.
Socialist governments are rooted in the authority, in the idea that the group supersedes the individual. So group health and group meaning supersedes individual health and meaning to an extreme that means that you and I don't actually own property. Our money is not actually our own in a way to do what God wants with them. So when we say God has given me resources to do for his sake and his glory, that flies in the face automatically of extreme socialist kinds of ways of talking about using things in the world. So I just think it's important to say that we're not just saying that all authorities are lesser authorities than God only. We're saying that that doesn't just include the spiritual realm. That's all of life.
Yeah, and I think there's a point here that's helpful to make in addition to that, and that is if God is the ultimate authority and all authority is derived from him, then to reject God's authority is the primal sin. So Adam and Eve,
yes.
What did they do? I mean, we talk about many things that Adam and Eve did, right? Adam was passive. He should have stood up.
He knew the word.
Right. There's lots of things going on there, but at the core of what happened is they were seeking to take for themselves authority that belonged only to God.
Right.
So, and that's the essence. That's
the human problem.
Right. That's the essence of what we're saying sin is against God's authority. To act on one's own authority against the authority of God is the essence of sin.
Right. Yes. To go against God's law is on the surface what we see as the way that's verbalized, but it's really about his authority to make those laws.
Right. Either God is the ultimate authority or he is not.
Right.
And that underlies so much of the decisions we make and the conversations that we have. And if we could back it up, back up to the root, do we believe that God is the ultimate authority and that is disclosed to us in his word, or don't we? Because it's usually an issue of authority.
Yes, well, and I was going to add, about a year ago, I got in a little bit of an online social media spat. Not a big one. And I didn't say anything that anybody would, oh, Pastor Scott. And we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I was making the point that even local magistrates, that state governors, that presidents, they all derive their authority from somewhere else.
Yes.
So in this case, in the United States, it's from the Constitution. Like inalienable or unalienable rights derive, actually that's Declaration of Independence, but those rights derive from this document that says those rights go beyond this document, which acknowledge that greater authority, in this case being God, we would say. But anybody who says, well, the law says, without recognizing that is based on an authority, they're just not recognizing that it's all a claim to authority.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Have we covered all that well enough? All right. Let's get to the three governments that are established by God, ways of governing. And by government, we don't just mean like civil or state government. I've just used the word to talk about the ways God has established governing in the world. Family, church, and state. Take it away.
All right, so the first one, family, it's good that you began with that first because family is the first government, using it in this terminology that we even find in Scripture. It's in the very first chapter of the Bible in Genesis. It's the ultimate and first human institution. So God made humans in his image. He made them male and female, Genesis 1:26 26 and 27. He said, "It's not good for the man to be alone. I'll make a helper fit for him." He creates Eve for companionship and completion. He brings her to the man as a custom-made solution. And then he says, and
Of the man, woman.
you hear the design in it. A man will leave his father and mother, hold fast, be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. And that becomes the design, God's blueprint for the first human institution of the family, which is later reinforced by Jesus in Matthew 19.
Which he has said before in Genesis 1:26 through 8. The reason for creation is to fill it with my goodness and glory.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's the purpose? So that's a great question. And I added this to what I had sent you before. But this is something I remember you preaching a lot about. So what is the purpose of
I've
the
got
family?
my own notes about this,
I
too.
figured
right?
you would.
Yeah.
So let me ask you.
No. You go ahead. I'll add.
All right, I'm sure you will. So the purpose is built right into Genesis 1:28. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth.
Yeah.
I see two purposes in that. Let me hear what you have and how you react to this. So I see the first one is reproducing the image of God.
Yes.
Now, to me, that's not just physically, but it's also spiritually. Because, for example, in Malachi 2:13 and 14, God takes issue with the people who have broken covenant with their wife or their youth because he says he wants, quote, godly offspring.
Right.
So it was always the intention.
That's a great verse.
Yeah.
That is a profound verse in ways that people don't track with easily until you understand the things you're saying now about what God's purposes in the world are.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we say to reproduce the image of God, and people say, well, it just says physically there, be fruitful and multiply. Yes, but it's in the context of God saying, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, male and female make them. So the image idea is built into the creation of man and woman. And the verses like Malachi or Ephesians 6, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Fathers, instruct them in the way of the Lord. Don't exasperate them. It's built into both physical and spiritual reproduction, the image of God. So
in Ephesians, Paul's saying those things at the end of what he's established as God's purposes in the world through the church. And then he's saying, this is how it works in your family. This is how it works in the workplace. This is how it works for your kids and your marriage.
Right.
And the Malachi 2:15 verse, I have it highlighted in my Bible here. He says, did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. Which is to say, I assume, you can make disciples not just in physical ways where they're a part of your family, but spiritual birthing kind of concept,
Right. So the first purpose then of the institution of the family, that first covenant, is to reproduce the image of God physically and spiritually. And the second is to exercise dominion over the earth as God's vice regents.
Yeah.
Because, again, he says, let us make them in our image and let them rule and have dominion because God has ultimate dominion. So I think you call this rightly stewardship.
Yeah.
Because we are not ultimately in charge, and yet the idea of dominion here is the idea of stewardship. So everything, all the resources that we control are to be done so in the way that God would have done it if he were here.
And that is baked into some of that concept of the Hebrew word for image there. One of the things that we don't often draw out in our preaching and discussion of the word being made in the image of God is the vice regency idea. There's actually you are like a royal part of this family, given what the king owns to steward for the king's sake. Yeah.
Right.
I also, I might save this for later. I think the earth doesn't work if humans don't work. God set up the world so that family, church, and government are how this is supposed to go together, which is why he institutes these things throughout Scripture. There's this concept of progressive revelation, like it doesn't all come out at first at the beginning. We have some snippets and some ideas in large-scale terms that take more clear form throughout Scripture. That's a pretty common way that a lot of biblical nerds talk about the progressive revelation of Scripture.
And he did. So that concept, you said, maybe we'll bring it out later, but the idea that it doesn't work unless we steward it well, that's even before the fall. He put him in the garden to work it and take care of it.
Genesis 2:15.
Right. So that before the fall, there was a need to work it and take care of it.
Yes, that was the problem.
Right.
That was the problem, is that he couldn't handle it by himself.
Right, and it wasn't good for him to be alone. But
Yeah.
there was work, there were tasks, there was dominion, there was government, even before the fall, which points to that there will be again in the renewed creation of heavens and earth, that there will be tasks, there will be direction, there will be dominion, as God deems it fit for us to do so.
So let me ask this. We talked about this in the context of family so far, the stewardship of all creation concept. Would you say that it applies equally, and I don't know, I'm not saying a third, I just mean the principle applies in the spheres of family, government, civil government, and church?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's the that's the hub that
very much
they all-
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And-
the
and
world
I-
doesn't work if humans don't work.
Right. And Scott has preached for the last 2 weeks on what the biblical roles are within marriage, the sacrificial, loving
Yeah.
leadership of the husband, the willing submission voluntarily on the part of the wife to support and honor. Those things, listen to those messages, watch them to understand that well. We can't rehash all of that here. But I do want to point out that the implication of a good marriage, and said this with you, with Scott and staff, the implication of a good marriage is more than just a happy relationship between me and my spouse.
Right.
It's about the glory of God.
Right.
Because in Ephesians 5, Paul says, this is a profound mystery.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Christ in the church here. Like, this goes way beyond just you getting along with the person you live with.
Yeah.
Because it's about God's glory.
I sort of hear Paul at that point saying, "Yeah, you're hearing me talk about marriage, and you're all tracking like, yeah, we need to, yeah, he needs to, yeah, she needs to," and he says, "Oh, by the way, don't forget,
Yeah.
I'm talking about Christ and the church.
Right.
Like, let me remind you about what God's larger picture is here.
Right.
Yeah.
And lots of details that we could bring up, but I don't have time to go through all of that.
We do not. We do not. So, have we covered family enough?
I mean, we haven't mentioned children, but
No.
the children obviously are to be shaped and formed into the image of God as their parents lead them. Their role is to obey.
Yes.
I mean, if you could boil it down to one word, it's obey.
Well, and I speak to my kids some in ways that try not to make this too Jesus juke, spiritually guilt-inducing kinds of statements. But I was explaining to our 7-year-old the other day, hey, when mommy asks you to do this, it's because you love her, because that's how you show that you love God.
Connect all the dots. I tried
And
a
I
lot
thought that
of
was a
my
little-
kids too. I did.
That's probably a little
And
much.
mainly they're like, I just want to go hang out with
Please
my
just
friends.
let me go eat
Yeah.
what I wanted to do. Or
Yeah. Probably one thing before we leave this topic, though, and that is because we have talked about the difference between man and woman.
Yeah.
A good marriage pictures what God is like. If you think of the Trinity, they're equal in essence, but they're distinct in role.
Mm-hmm.
Like God the Father did not die on the cross for our sins.
Right.
Jesus was not sent as the Spirit into our hearts.
Right.
They have distinct roles. And this whole concept of submission, of course, is a big deal.
Yes.
And yet what we fail to realize is that the Son voluntarily submits to the Father.
Yes.
And
all
yet-
over the place.
and
John
yet-
is a great exercise
Right.
in learning that.
So the Son submits to the Father, yet is his equal in dignity, value, worth, essence, everything about that equal, and yet voluntarily submits. It is a distinction in role which doesn't imply inferiority or even ability.
And Jesus doing that was with an awareness that God's will and purpose in the world is the glorification of himself.
Right.
Yeah.
And their working together is the model for us as husband and wife of how they are one in essence and value and worth, and yet their role is distinct and they work together in a complementary way that accomplishes the purpose of God. We're to be modeled after that.
So, government of the family means submission in ways that glorify God. What does it mean in ways that don't necessarily, like what does submit not always mean?
Okay, right. And so there's a good article that
Because I
found.
covered some of that
Yeah.
in the last couple sermons in vague terms,
Okay.
but not specifically.
All right. Yeah, so there's a good article in Desiring God. If you just want to put it into your browser, 6 things submission is not desiring God. This is helpful from Piper's organization. So this is actually him in a message that he taught. But submission is not agreeing on everything.
Right.
You don't just agree and you're not identical. If you both think exactly the same, one of you is not necessary.
Right.
So it's not agreeing on everything. It doesn't mean...
There are a lot of marriages where one thinks the other is not really necessary.
There you go.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean leaving your brain at the altar. It doesn't mean a wife cannot influence her husband. It doesn't mean the will.
Does anybody know my wife?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean putting the will of the husband before the will of Christ or of God.
True story.
It doesn't mean you derive all your spiritual strength from your husband. It doesn't mean living or acting in fear. It doesn't mean disobeying God.
Right.
Because every person has a higher ultimate authority, and that is God.
Yes.
Every person.
And and the world working in the way that God's designed the world to work necessarily includes that submission idea, whatever the sphere.
Yeah.
And that's what people aren't readily giving themselves to.
Right.
That is a result of the fall and sin, like we talked about the authority problem in the first place.
Right. In a good marriage that reflects God in his triuneness, that the Trinity, right? The husband should support and encourage his wife to use her gifting for God. Mm-hmm. The wife should encourage and support her husband to lead lead the family for God. We're both called to serve one another as Christ served us, Philippians 2.
Yeah.
We're both called to forgive one another and extend grace to us as Christ does to us,
yeah.
Ephesians 4:32.
Yep.
And we're both called to be faithful to each other as Christ is faithful to us, Hebrews 13:4. So there are lots of ways that this plays out. I just think it's important that we say some of those things before we go on.
Yeah. Okay, so we have to talk about church and government.
Right.
What's the Bible say about church? Let's do this briefly.
Okay.
Because a lot of people want the government part.
Right. So
and that's where the most confusion and frustration,
Right.
etc., comes in.
You're right.
Although church can be frustrating. All right, church was established at Pentecost in Acts 2. Anything in particular to say about that?
The purpose of the church, Grudem has a helpful definition. There's 3 purposes. Why do we have a church?
Yeah.
Worship, nurture, evangelism, and mercy. Evangelism and mercy going together. So worship is ministry to God.
Mm-hmm.
Nurture is ministry to believers. And evangelism and mercy is ministry to the world. I thought that was a helpful triumvirate of what we do in the church. It's ministry to God, nurture, ministry to believers, and evangelism and mercy, ministry to the world.
It's up, in, and out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a common way that people have talked about church
Right.
over a long time.
If you look for the activities of the church, I know you'd agree Acts 2:42 is a common one to see, well, what does the church actually do?
Right.
Like if you look at it, what's it doing? It talks about teaching, talks about fellowship, the Lord's Supper, prayer. It's talking about the basic things that comprise what the church does in their activities.
And in doing those things, the moving forward of the work of God in the world clearly was the result. Like the next verse,
Yeah.
awe came upon every soul. Many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles in that day and time. All who believed were together, had all things in common. And then, it goes on to describe some of those things. Praising God, having favor with the people, and the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. So the work of God went out when they were devoted to teaching, fellowship, the Lord's Supper, and prayer. Purpose of the church. We talked about the primary activities of the church.
And how the leaders equip the church, right? Ephesians 4:11 and 12.
And this gets about the government.
Yeah.
Sometimes the word polity, which has the same root as the idea of politics, meaning the use of power. Make no mistake, everybody has power. The question is not, because there's a lot out in the world today that basically says all power is wrong. Which is just not an acknowledgement of how a godly use of power is meant to happen. So, polity is a word that's often used to talk about how a church is governed. So, leadership is a part of that in the same way that we talked about how a family runs. Yeah?
Yeah. We talk about in the New Testament, there are 2 main offices. Elders, but those are also called overseers and pastors. Mm-hmm. We believe those are interchangeable words, elder, overseer, pastor. Mm-hmm. So the elders here, pastor in the sense that they shepherd. Mm-hmm. Pastors function as elders. That's just the way it is, and they're overseers. So that's the primary spiritual leaders. And then the other is the deacons, which is primarily a word for servant or service. Mm-hmm. Every Christian is a servant, but there's a particular office within the New Testament of those who held the office of deacon, who had to be tested first and be distinguished and set apart.
Be careful with anybody who says, this word means this all the time it's used. That's an example of a word that the context guides the usage.
Right.
Diakonos can mean depending on where it's used and why, can mean something that just means generically servant, or something that means an office
Right.
toward that in a way that has that authority.
Right.
But the authority piece is the difference in that use of the word.
Yeah.
So you'll sometimes hear people say, "Oh, well, the word means servant, therefore da da da," and that's why. So just be careful of that sometimes.
There's similarities with the family as with the church in that the members of a local church are called to submit to the leadership of the church, like children are called to submit to their parents.
Right.
So Hebrews 13:17, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account.
Yeah.
1 Peter 5, elders are told to do that in a way that is not for shameful gain. It's willingly, it's not under compulsion, it's as examples, it's not lording it over. And so that begs the question, so when should they disobey the leaders of the church?
Right.
And
Which is the same kind of question as when does my husband's authority
Right.
become
right,
problematic
'cause you
and
asked that
abusive and
question
ungodly
earlier.
in a way?
When
Right.
do I not submit?
Right.
Right, and we went over it quickly, but if your husband asks you to sin, the answer is no.
Right.
Similarly, in a church, there were 3 things that I looked up. So that when would you disobey the leaders of a church? If they're speaking about Jesus in ways that are false, because that's clear from Matthew 16, 2 John 9, 1 John 2:22. What do we say about Jesus? Like that is the first test. Do we
Yes.
speak the truth about Jesus?
Yes.
The second is, do we preach a false gospel? If we preach a false gospel, do not obey and do not follow. And then thirdly, does the teacher exhibit the character qualities of godliness?
Yes. which is why Paul makes very clear, not many should want to be teachers.
Yeah. I mean, those 3 things. What do they say about Jesus? Do they preach the true gospel? And what is their character like?
Okay. So we talked about roles and relationships between family and church. So let's get to civil government and state.
Right.
The authority of the state. Of course, the classic passage here is Romans 13.
Romans 13.
Which says that it says what it says about civil governments being an authority over the people because that's derived from God.
Right.
Yes.
So all authority, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment.
Does that have no limits?
Well,
Is that all the time? At what point does that government show itself to be not properly subject to God's purposes in the world?
yes, we know there certainly are times people will argue to what extent and how far you take it.
Yes.
But clearly in Scripture there are evidences of when you disobey.
Sure.
And, you know, I know we put together a list, Norm Geisler put together a list. You think of the midwives who were ordered by Pharaoh to kill all the Hebrew children, right?
Yes.
And they did not do so.
Right.
Right, because to take the life of the child or the unborn, as we would argue for abortion even, is wrong. And therefore obeying their authority in that case would have been to disobey God. And since all authority is derived from God, God is the ultimate authority. They could not obey that order.
Right.
That's an example of it. Daniel is a classic case. So Daniel was high in the civil government in Babylon, and yet when he was ordered to not pray to anyone except to the king,
Right.
he went back to his room where 3 times a day he faced Jerusalem and he prayed.
Yeah.
And he refused to obey that order.
And what do you know? God used it.
And God did use that. Or the 3 friends who refused to bow down to the
Yep.
statue and they were thrown into the fiery furnace. Great examples of when it is right to disobey because you have been directly ordered to do something God disapproves of.
Yes. So we're getting to question time here soon. So if you've got questions and you haven't yet, put them in the comments, or you haven't texted them to that number 608 something 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 that's on the lower third there. Make sure you get those in, and we'll get to those soon here. Any other things about church and state?
Yeah. So the separation of the church and state, right? That word comes from Thomas Jefferson, but we misunderstand it. And
Yes.
I found a helpful quote that historically the separation of church and state meant that the church was answerable to God and the state was answerable to God. Separation of church and state assumed a division of labor. The church had its job.
Yes.
The state had its job.
Yes.
The church
And the phrase of separation of church and state doesn't actually come from the Constitution.
No.
A lot of people think that comes
No.
from original American
No.
founding documents, but it doesn't.
Right.
It comes from a letter later on
by Jefferson. Yeah.
by Jefferson, where he uses the phrase about a wall of separation, and that was used by I think Supreme Court in the 40s or 50s. I can't remember. I think it was in the 40s or 50s.
This is where we should ask David Scott.
To make, hey, David Scott, if you're out there, chime in and tell us what the answer is. To make this what our modern conception of separation of church and state means.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was intended to mean the church doesn't maintain a standing army.
Right.
And the state doesn't do evangelism.
Right.
Or administer the sacraments, but they both are accountable to God. That's what it was intended to mean.
Yes.
Separately accountable. And if you think of the theocracy in the Old Testament with Israel, where it was either God ruled or God ruled through divinely appointed kings, even there, the priests had different rules than the kings. And Uzziah, who took the incense into the presence of the Lord, was struck with leprosy because he usurped the role of the priest. So there was always a division of duty and roles. But where we've taken that is, in today's culture, the separation of church and state means the government is not answerable to God. That's not what it's intended to mean.
And in Romans 13, in fact, if you Woo, okay, I got a couple controversial things to say toward the end here, but one of them is this. Christians who say Romans 13 means we are subject to the governing authorities, boom, end of story. Romans 13 assumes and even states pretty clearly that the restraint of evil is the main function of government.
It is.
Yes.
Yes.
And so we can't forget that as a part of what government is enabled by God, by his authority to do.
Yeah, and we've talked about what's the purpose of family, what's the purpose of church. Let's state that.
Yes.
What's the purpose of the state or the civil government? It is primarily to restrain evil and to maintain, uphold, and protect the sanctity of life and property. That is primarily what it does.
Yes.
Now, there's lots of tentacles to that, but we get that from Romans 13, 3 and 4. So that's the primary role.
And to keep with what we've said about God's authority and his purposes in the world, as we talked about in Genesis with family and with church, government is likewise meant to be a context within which we can work out our tasks. So the humans doing the work is what makes the world work.
Right. It says he is God's servant for your good.
Yes.
Meaning the one in authority.
Yes, for your good.
God's servant for your good. That's the intention. That's where they derive the authority, and that's the purpose.
So I've seen a lot of memes early on about coronavirus stuff like, let's vigilante out in the streets and take this place back. And then there are Christians on the other side, quickly a lot of memes that said, yes, but Romans 13 say that we are subject to the governing authorities. Both of those have not really read the passage deeply. Right.
And so we've told you about gotquestions.org as a good resource.
Yeah.
I saw they added one very recently about some Christians saying, hey, Peter and John said we must obey God rather than men, so we're going to gather in our churches and worship despite what the governors say to do.
I've seen that verse, that passage talked about.
And I thought Got Questions was very helpful. I said, look at the context. Peter and John were commanded not to preach about Jesus.
Right.
They said, we can't not do that.
Right.
We are not commanded not to proselytize.
Right.
We can proselytize all we want. We just have to change the medium for the sake of health. But they're not stopping us from making disciples. And of course, it's only on a temporary basis anyway.
Right.
But the point was not to stop people from proselytizing when the governor said don't meet. It's like, do it online, do it virtually.
Yeah.
More power to you.
Sure, it better be temporary.
There's a huge difference.
If it's not temporary, folks, I'm raising up an army.
Well, all right. I did want to say one other thing. You asked about the relationship of church and state.
Yes.
I heard this in watching a podcast this week, and it was really helpful. The church deals with sin. The state deals with crime. So this is important when they overlap. So if there is abuse of women or abuse of children, right?
Yes.
That occurs within the body or the church, that first goes to the authorities.
Yep.
Because that's a crime issue.
Yep.
Later, we deal with church discipline as we need to.
Sure.
But the first step is the authorities, because the state deals with crime.
Yep.
So I don't want you ever thinking as an elder that I would hear of a situation where there was a pedophile or something like that, and the answer would be, let's just take care of that internally, because that is not what we should do.
Yes.
That's a law and a criminal issue.
Okay, so we've been putting links to some of the things that we've referred to along the way, the Grudem stuff about the church, a gotquestions.org thing, the Ligonier thing that has Christians in government, and the list from Norm Geisler. So let's talk about some of the specific things about when we should disobey the state.
Right, this is helpful.
So let's stop there and then get to some questions. I do have a little rant I want to go off on in
Oh,
a second,
great,
but yeah.
All right, so briefly, when the government prohibits the worship of God, so we take this from Exodus 5, where Moses says, our people need to go and worship in the wilderness for a 3-day journey, because they did convocations like that. They separated out.
Yes.
And Pharaoh's like, nope, you can't do it.
This is why he says, let my people go.
Right.
Yeah. It wasn't just let my people go so they can go to the place where they
Right.
wanted to go.
Right.
People think that that's what...
No,
this
it was
is
the
let
whole-
my people worship.
Right.
Yeah.
When the government requires us to take innocent life, we cannot obey. We talked about that earlier. When it demands the killing of God's servants, in 1 Kings 18, there are, I can't remember how many prophets that are sequestered and kept safe from Jezebel or Ahab, so that they're not killed. It's like 150. Was it? It's something 100. I don't remember. That's 1 Kings 18, 1 through 4, if you want to look it up.
Yeah.
When it requires the worship of angels, we talked about Daniel and the 3 friends refusing to do that. Commanding prayer to a man, Daniel again refusing to do that, always prayed in his upper room to God. We talked about Peter and John. When we are prohibited from preaching the gospel, they said we must obey God rather than men. Revelation 13, where John goes to worship an angel, and he's like, no, you worship God alone.
Right.
I'm just an angel.
Yeah.
I even think of Rahab as an example of where she disobeyed. The king of Jericho's like, bring out those men who came to you. And she refused to do it. She disobeyed for 2 reasons. One, to protect innocent life.
Yes.
And secondly, to obey God, to align herself. She said, we have heard about your God.
Right.
And she was aligning herself with that God, not with him, the king who wanted to kill. Now, yes, she lied. Let's not go there. That's for another discussion. But the point is she was honored because she broke with the Canaanites and followed the God of Israel in pursuing Yahweh.
950 prophets.
900
450 of Baal, 400 of Asherah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So those are examples in the scripture of when we should disobey rightly
Right.
the government.
And I'm sure we'll have some questions, and if they're on not in the comments or on the text message requests, some comments and questions that refer to what are the limits of those. So we'll talk through that.
Can I just point out one thing about the state we haven't mentioned?
Yeah.
We are told that our posture toward the state should be normally submissive and obedient, and that we should pray for the state. I think as Americans, our natural instinct is this independence.
Yes.
We conquered the West. We do things on our own. We came over here from those people in England, and by golly, we took care of the world.
Yeah.
But the reality is, Scripture says things like, I urge, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. This is 1 Peter. Fear God. Honor the emperor. 1 Peter 2. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. There's so many of those phrases besides Romans that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So I just want to say the first place we begin is a posture of humility and praying for our leaders, not
Well, and
trying
those
to
go
find
together.
fault.
Those go together. It's like
Right.
we talked about a little bit at when we were talking about marriage ministry stuff last Thursday night. The act of prayer is resetting a heart and mind in a way that accounts for the way God's created the world and the way He's asked us to be subject to authorities.
And wouldn't you say that would apply to each of these 3 realms?
Absolutely.
Like that should be our posture.
Yeah.
So if Beth Ann and I are working with a couple in the marriage ministry, and what we hear is just antagonism between the two of them, like they're already in the wrong starting place.
Are you praying for your spouse?
Right. And we've had spouses tell us, God changed me when I started consistently praying for my spouse.
Yes.
Like they changed my spouse too,
Yeah.
but they changed me.
Right.
God changed me. But that should be true in families, in church, and in government. Do you pray for your leaders?
Yeah.
Is that your posture?
Yes, indeed. All righty. Are we to question time? I think we're about to question time. So we'll get to a question here in just a second. Staff who's watching in the conference room, you must send a question. Okay, so what are the limits to this? My submission to church, family, and state. What are the relationships between them? Who's in charge of what? Are we saying God, church, state, family, God, family, state, church, God, state, family, church?
Okay, we can put God at the top. That's easy.
We can be sure about that.
We must always submit to God's authority in every. It's the overarching principle that
Sure.
undergirds everything else.
And I've set this up on purpose to be
Right.
the way we typically think about it.
Right.
But I'm not sure that's how the principle of God as authority overall, giving us His world to steward it for His sake. I'm not sure it works out that way in principle, as much as this is the thing that God's in the middle, and it hits in all of these.
Right. So we already said from the beginning, God set up each of those three spheres.
Right.
So they're ultimately deriving their authority from Him. But those spheres normally operate in different areas. So the family unit normally deals with the children and the raising of the children and the education of the children and the discipline of the children, whereas the state doesn't. The church deals with the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry, the building up of the body of Christ, the propagation of the gospel. The state doesn't do that, but neither do the church and the family deal with issues of crime and legislation. And so there's differing spheres of influence. For the most part, I think while they derive their authority from God, they work separately in the sense that they don't normally have overlapping spheres. Yes, they can.
Yes.
But the intention is not to be overlapping. That's where I pointed out earlier, if there's a crime within the body of the church,
yes,
and it deals with something like pedophilia or the abuse of women, then that needs to be brought to the state, because that's an issue of criminal and legal issues.
So they're working concurrently.
Yes.
But not necessarily concomitantly. Okay. So the
Okay.
Venn diagram has all these overlaps.
Wow, that makes sense, but it's not very helpful. Can you break that down into more usable terminology?
Well,
because I agree with what you said.
Yeah, we've spoken about how these different spheres are working at the same time.
Yes.
Given godly principles to them.
Yes.
But they have different places of authority.
Right. They're needed because they don't necessarily address the same spheres of influence. They deal with different issues. Now, there is some overlap, but primarily they are not meant to address the same issues.
Right.
In the same way that the king was not supposed to offer incense in the Old Testament, that was the priest's role.
Yes.
Even within a theocracy.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. And the king, when it was working correctly in the Old Testament, in a theocracy, knew that place and role.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So, question: what is the godly way to respond to the persecution? The persecution that comes from civil government, from the state? I would say
persecution for what? Because we're not law-abiding citizens?
Let's not assume
for
that.
Believers?
Persecution for believers.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we want to give a tangible example, a practical one?
Well, the seminary we went to had a man. He was one of the ones that stood in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square. There were 4 main students.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that's where they were. Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but he was one of the 4 original students who started that whole thing.
1989.
Sounds good. That man standing in front of the tank is an example of godly, nonviolent, not creative, not do criminal activity kind of a response that says, "Do what you want to me." But I'm going to take a posture of God's the authority in this world, and you are not.
I didn't know the background on him.
Yeah.
The image is, I was 19 at the time, and so the image is really
Yeah, I
in my
barely
mind.
remember it.
Yeah.
That means I was probably, like 7? I'm just kidding. He's not that much older.
Stop it. I would add to that. So persecution we are told to expect.
Yes.
And if we're not experiencing persecution, are we standing for anything?
Right.
I mean, I know those are hard words. I preach them to myself.
Right.
Because personally, I want to just get along with everyone. My wife says to me, I should have been an ambassador for the UN because I just enjoy that type of role. Of can't we just get along here? Let me see what's going on here. Let me try to work it over here.
Yes.
But that doesn't always work when there's right and wrong, and there's Jesus, who is a lightning rod figure.
And I would not call this persecution, though sometimes it would be. We're talking about persecution from the state. But the effect of living a godly life in community with others around you will create that kind of thing in family, in a church, in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that applies, period.
Like we as elders in this church, if we were ever told by our government that we cannot meet, we will still meet in some way. Now, we will find how to do that,
Yeah.
but we won't stop meeting because Hebrews is clear that we need to.
Yeah.
We won't stop teaching the one true gospel.
Yeah.
We won't call evil good and good evil. We will not do those things. And there is pressure in our society today to call evil good and good evil.
Oh, absolutely.
In many ways.
Yeah.
And we cannot do that. So I think we should, number one, not be surprised by persecution. Jesus said, don't be surprised the world hates you. It hated me first.
Yes. And in the process, not being surprised also means having thought about and being ready for that in a way that means when it's happening, I'm already, I have decided to respond in a godly way.
Right.
And not just in a lashback kind of way.
As much as
not out of anger.
Right. As much as it lies within you, live peaceably with all men is the command. So we're not to look to instigate problems with our government. We're not here trying to rile them up. We're trying to be obedient citizens. So, yeah.
So a related question. If I focus more on my quiet life and my service to God, and I ignore the greater state of my national government, the authority of my civil government, cognizant of just the local stuff, is that biblically problematic? If I stay in, I'm just living my quiet, godly service to God only life, and I just take care of my own little world, knowing other things go on, knowing there is systemic oppression, knowing that babies are being murdered. I think we're upwards of 800,000 a year. Is that biblically problematic? I think I would say a couple things. One, not everybody is called to larger platform that extends beyond our sphere. So I think if faithfulness to the authority of God in the things that we have is what you are doing, I think that's okay. But I don't think that means you should live as if that stuff going on in the world that is a problem, I don't have to think about, just as I would say the same about this here.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people try to protect this little thing to themselves as if that means I don't have to be aware of... And I feel like I was guilty of this for quite a while in ministry. Never saying anything about what's going on in the world is the best posture, because I can only take care of this thing right here.
It's a wisdom issue.
As is most of this stuff we're talking about.
And I think it does depend on your situation, your influence.
Yes.
And aren't we dealing with this right now? We're not ready to talk at length about it, but even right now with the riots and all the protests that are going on,
right.
We have injustice that was done to what appears to be a Christian brother,
right.
regardless of the fact whether he was Christian or not, a black man.
Yeah. And
so then what is our response? And last night there was a Greenville protest and other things like that. We have to think through what role do we play in these things.
Sure.
At my work, it's just interesting. There was a blog post by our leader of HR and someone else about we don't stand for this, and we're about 15,000 people.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what, this is an opportunity for me as a Christian to do a couple things. Number one, to show that I also believe that injustice in society is wrong.
Of course.
And I'm going to add my voice to that, but I'm going to do it in a way that honors Jesus as the answer.
Yeah.
And I won't get into my response, but I prayed about it and I took a risk because I do not serve at a Christian organization. And I threw out there that the answer is Jesus Christ and the cross by which all men are reconciled to Jesus Christ. And it was a risk that I took, but I felt in my position that I should do that, and I should link it to my overall concern and care for what was going on in our society at large.
Right.
And I just felt that's what the Lord wanted me to do. I know others have gone to protests. I know others have written things. I know others give money. We are citizens, and we are all ultimately responsible in one way or another. What I keep coming back to is James 1:19. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And I was thinking about this. My first reaction to issues that are not within my immediate purview, like black, white, and
Sure.
is I need to listen.
Yeah.
I need to listen. I take a posture of humility.
And I also think a lot of people have a first response of injustice, anger, and I understand that. But when that injustice, when anger at injustice finds no peace in the sense that I'm aware that my anger at that injustice has to have a change in me in the here and now with you, with people around me, in that sphere. So I'm going back to the question a little bit. We read these things about what's going on in the world, and we realize, what does that mean for me here today with my people, the people in my world? And how do I expand that world so that caring for, in the same way we talked about the stewardship of all things for the good of God, how does that production of the goodness of God happen with those with whom I have relationships? And how do I expand what I know is creating an environment here in Greenville, Tennessee, where the gospel holds true, with people who are not in the same situation as me, people who are black, people who are minorities, people who may not rub shoulders with me, because I think in Greene County, the population of African American is something like 3 to 4%.
Yeah, it's ridiculously low, yes.
It may not even be quite that high. It's been a while since I've looked at it. But
I think you don't want to be paralyzed and not do anything because you feel overwhelmed by the
that's where I think a lot of people are.
right. But find what you can do. So, for example, and there's, I only use these examples so that you can see practically how I've had to struggle with these things because I don't naturally know what to do. So I am against abortion. Well, but my wife and I, Beth Ann, have in the past supported financially adoption ministries, because it's not just, you don't just want to say I'm against something, but you want to actually do something to further the cause for good. So we've given money to adoption agencies. The poor that are struggling in other countries, like Venezuela is where I grew up because that's where my parents were missionaries. So my wife and I help support some of those church people that are struggling so deeply. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to connect the dots to what can I do.
Right.
I wrote that blog post yesterday that everyone potentially could see at my organization because I felt like I should add my voice as a Christian to this. We don't want to be paralyzed into doing nothing,
right?
But we want to choose ways that honor God, are winsome, and point to Jesus Christ as the answer.
Which is especially difficult right now, since the cultural climate is, if you say something, you automatically are in a place of potential persecution.
Yeah. And it's easier to just avoid it. This is the struggle
right.
I feel internally.
Right.
Like if I don't say anything and I just hunker down,
right.
I'll be left alone.
Yes.
I don't think biblically I'm supposed to do that.
And I don't think that actually works.
Well, it probably won't. But find ways that you can make a difference in the ways God has resourced and gifted you. And I just gave those examples as what I think are small ways, but trying to contribute toward a larger problem. Because if we just hunker down, we just ignore the issue in the long run.
So who should I vote for was one question that came in. We're just going to skip over that. Is that cool with you? You should vote for Tyson Hodge, Greenville campus pastor. All right. Should I be, or is it okay to be a one-issue voter? What if all other 99 are left unmet?
That's hard.
That's hard. This is not a popular thing to say, but I have for a long time been, all things being equal, there are a few issues about which I will say that changes it for me. There are a few issues where, and one of the most for me has been, that's more of a one issue, is the abortion question for me personally. Now there are others that I put into those categories. It's not just like that's the thing only, because there are a lot of other issues that affect all that. But
yeah, I mean now we've gotten into
wisdom that is not easily answered.
Yeah, this is a tough one. So, just putting my cards on the table, my wife and I voted for a third-party candidate last presidential election, and we did so because we didn't think either of the options available was pleasing and honoring to God. Now, are we going to do that again this time around? I don't know. I'm praying about it already. It's hard.
I was where you all were, and then I ended up not being.
Yeah,
because I just took the lesser of
I get it.
what I felt were evils.
Totally get it.
Further than you felt at the time, which is what it is.
What I would say on this is just be careful that whatever decision you make, because it is a wisdom issue, and I know you have good reasons for whom you decide to vote for. Make sure that you do it in such a way that Christ is honored above all. So if you vote for so-and-so, you say, this is why, but these are the things that do not please God and that I'm praying about. And so it's not this one person, whomever they are, represents everything about me that pleases God, because we
Right.
know that's not true.
Right. When you say honors Christ in it, you don't mean that all of the purposes of God will be met in this person,
Right.
which is to misunderstand what politics can do.
Right. So couch it wisely when you say who you're voting for and why.
Yeah.
And some of you have. I've read things you've posted on the internet where you said,
Sure.
okay, I don't agree with so-and-so fully, but I appreciate these 3 things, and that's why I'm voting for them.
Yeah.
All right, that's a more nuanced discussion. It's not just hook, line, and sinker, this candidate, no matter what.
Well, I think a key piece in that is understanding the limits of politics.
Yeah.
And I don't think very many people reckon with this well in our world today. I think the God of politics today has taken people to a place that Messiah-sizes the whole thing in a way that cannot possibly meet.
Right. We must remember that politics will never solve our problems. And if we think
How
they're
many
going
problems has it solved?
This is so true. Our answer does not lie in who we elect. It does not lie. Until Jesus reigns, our answer does not lie in who is in authority in this world.
Which is why we can see, why all this rancor? Why is the world so da-da-da? What do you mean, why is it? Because they're putting their trust in a human-based system that is not accounting for the principles of the goodness of God being communicated in them. If a government said, hey, we're going to be about restraining evil so that our citizenry can be about doing good, that'd be a pretty good change, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's happening very many places in the world, period, today.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, we brought up some tough things. We talked just at the end about race and politics, and
Sure.
those are really hard.
How about COVID? How does this fit with...
Well, I think you addressed it a few weeks ago, which is
Smidge.
It's a bit polarizing because
Yes.
people are on different sides of the aisle on this.
Yes.
Whether you are taking it extremely cautiously and carefully,
Mm-hmm.
or whether you think it's all a big hoax and a conspiracy. It calls for grace. It calls for kindness when speaking to one another. It calls for humility. Again, I keep going back to James 1:19. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry.
Yeah.
Does that characterize us? I mean, I need to think about that. So, on wisdom and grace issues...
It definitely characterizes me, that's for sure.
I,
So slow to speak.
at the end of the day, whether you are right or wrong, do you want the aroma of Christ to be what your words, your attitudes, and your actions are drenched with? That's
Yeah.
the key.
Yeah.
So that no matter what you say, what side of the argument you're on, when people leave, do they say, that person reminded me of Jesus? Or is it, I hope they're right because, man, were they sure angry?
Yeah. And in this context, we're talking about, does that person leave the interaction with you, or, and not just in verbal terms, but communication with you, relationship with you over an extended period of time? Do people leave that relational context with us, understanding that what drives the way we do what we do in our work, that how we treat our spouses, our children, the way we speak about the government, all of those spheres, does that person go away with an understanding that we have submitted ourselves to the authority of God in how we do that in those other spheres? I think there are lots of nooks and crannies to the
Oh
questions
my goodness, yes.
of coronavirus, COVID world, church, family, state. Who should I be listening to? Who should I follow? And we're not going to answer all that today because we've got to go ahead and let people get back to work because
Yeah.
Brown Bags and Bibles is about over here. Any last minute thoughts before we close up?
Keep learning. Don't assume that once you've got a viewpoint on something, that's the end all, beat all. My wife gave me a book yesterday, with this whole race issue. I think it was Piper adopted...
Bloodlines.
Yeah, Bloodlines.
Yeah.
And he adopted a black girl or something. I can't
Yep.
remember the details.
Yep.
But she's reading that now, and I thought, okay, that would be helpful. First of all, Piper's a source
Her name
that I
is
trust.
Talith,
Okay.
yeah.
But he would have a little more context in what that family that isn't traditional,
Yep.
and they may experience some of the things that I personally don't understand. And so I think the keep learning thing is really important. That has to do with the listen. Quick to listen, slow to speak. There's a marriage tagline that, no, it's not. This was in our small groups. The training we got that Tommy did, our small group training, was the four L's: listen, love, learn, lead. Listen first, then love. Listen, learn, love, then lead. You lead at the end after you've done the other three things.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a good posture for us to take on all of these things.
Yeah. Because what we really are talking about, as Scripture reminds us again and again, is that our subjection, our submission to these authorities is as unto the Lord.
Yeah.
Which is to say, when a believer is acting, talking, living as if I must subject myself, I must submit myself to no one and no thing, they are not understanding what it means to live under the lordship of Christ, period.
Right.
Whatever the sphere.
Yeah, that's a great place to end.
Yeah.
The best of us in the highest position of power, according to Scripture, is a slave of Christ.
Absolutely.
That's our best position.
Yeah.
We are a slave of Christ.
Yeah.
So everyone is under authority. And let's make sure that's played out in our lives.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us for Brown Bags and Bibles, where we've been breaking down life's biggest befuddlements about the roles and relationships of church, family, and state with biblical basics. Next week's question, we've bantied about. Bantied is not the word I'm looking for.
Sure it is. Starts with a B. Go on.
Bantied, batted, bantered, back and betwixt about a few different questions. So we'll let you know soon.
Yeah,
Not quite sure.
I agree. Let's think about that a little
We
bit.
want to simmer a bit on that. So thanks for joining us.
That was a big lead up to nothing.
I know, yes. Lots of good bees there for not much. So thanks for joining us. Join us next week. Brown Bags and Bibles, Thursday at noon. Thanks.
Thank you.